I still race. I get up in the morning. I don't know what motivates me. I'm tired. I think that I'm slow, and 600 people meet at on a road. This is a road race. This wasn't a trail race. Why a road race? Well, I actually wanted to time myself. A trail race, you're traversing, you're going up steep inclines, and you're going through treacherous declines, and the time is not of the essence. The position, the hunting of other men hunting you, running out of sight of men to break them mentally, to be out of their visibility. But the road race, this was an out and back course, so you get to see if a man is ahead of you, he is facing you as he on the turnaround, and there's a menacing glance that he's so far ahead of you that you can actually see him. And then similarly, you pass by every slow person, so you see all 600 people in this race, and then your time. This was a flat course, nearly at sea level, going along the Chattahoochee River, and the gun goes off, and the police motorcycle begins to lead what is known as the lead pack. Yet the lead pack disintegrates immediately due to the speed of the pace. We hit the first mile at 5:30, which was.
Were you in the lead pack then?
In a half a mile I was leading the race, and I thought to myself, by golly, I'm leading. And the competitor, my main. What would be a good word for someone you're going against in a running race? I would not say my
your antagonist.
My antagonist, the lead antagonist, decided to counter move, and we were running neck and neck until mile 1. I realized the pace, while perhaps when I was in my early 20s, 5:30 would have been exactly where I should have been, but I knew that was a little bit too fast. And so he began to stretch out his lead, and I had to let him go because I began to feel like I was going to vomit at mile 1. And having fasted the day before, it wasn't a good sign. But I followed him, and there was a chase pack, a contingency of 4 men that were working together to try to hunt me down. But unlike a trail race where such a pack is probably less likely because the formation is less likely due to the lack of visibility. You have these switchbacks. They're winding and turning and undulating, and the sight line is perhaps less than 20 yards at times. Yet there was pure visibility. This was very similar to the panoptic structure.
The panopticon.
The panopticons.
Yes.
So there are no, in other words, in a road race, on an out and back course for a 10K course, there are no secrets under the eyes of the great creator. And so this guy beat me, and he had the great pacing of the police motorcycle, and it's one of those great police motorcycles with the flashing lights, and the idea that a motorcycle is pacing you, it gives you a great advantage, but you have to be fast enough to win the pacing of the police motorcycle. And alas, I was slower, but I fought off the pack. Third place was 17 seconds behind me, and that pack slowly disintegrated. I think in the last mile or so, as the uphill, there were some uphills right towards the end, and with my trail racing background, I'm used to brutally steep uphills that break the spirit and conscientiousness and drive and willpower of men, and it's a constant in trail racing. So I always welcome the steep, undulating hills, the rain, the mud, the rocks, the roots, the trees, the general uncertainty about not even knowing when you're on course.
But do you find it easier now to run on the roads after doing a lot of trail running? I mean, has it made you a better runner, trail running?
Trail running has made me a tougher runner, but perhaps we're sheltered by our actual level of fitness, because if you go to a lot of trail races and you're competing against a variety of different people, you never know really how good you are unless you're racing against the same guys on a regular basis. I do race against some pretty elite guys, and I know what they race on the road, and I also know how they place when they go to major races, so I have that benefit. But at the smaller races that I win, my times are all over the place because of the nature of the course. And some of these courses aren't even measured properly. Road races are all certified. Trail races, there's really no way to certify an undulating course that might change the night before a race because of they've had instances where they discover a group of hornets' nests or bees' nests that they can't remove, so they have to make the race go around it, or a tree falls down that no one can possibly get over.
So it really strikes me as being very pure racing, because it's you, when you get rid of time, it's just you versus the others, and there's no other way to measure it than by victory.
Right. So, but the guy who beat me, he's an interesting guy. He's a muralist. He created a large mural on the Beltline. The Beltline is a large running and hiking path that thousands and thousands of people use every day in Atlanta. And he's also creating a mural at the transit station that they call the MARTA, and it's in Midtown. And so he won this large funding to do this. So the guy's an artist, and he's also an undefeated ultra distance runner. He races 30 and 50 mile races, which is astounding that he has the leg speed that he has, and that he's racing a road race. But the combination of his being a fairly successful graphic artist, a ultra distance runner, and only being 25 was quite an astounding nemesis to have. And I'm not sure what would have happened to him if I was in better fitness and I beat him. Would he have been crushed? Would he have abandoned his work on the mural? Would he have just gone out into the woods to reassess his reason and his drive? He says that his visions for the murals, he calls it the forest within the city, come from his running in the Appalachian Mountains. These 50-mile runs, he has these imprints of the wilderness, and then he returns to the city. He lives in Marietta, I believe, but he does his murals in public eye, wearing a fluorescent orange vest, actually, because of safety reasons. In downtown Atlanta. So he is affected by the Appalachian Mountains, and then he in his ultra distance running, and again he's undefeated, and then he takes these imprints, the way that the wilderness has seared these images, this wildness, into his brain, and he puts it out in an urban mural. And so
now so 30 miles to 50 miles is considered ultra running. I thought it was like 100 miles was ultra running.
100 is I wouldn't say the max, but 100 is considered near extreme. I mean, there's more, and there are stage races, but 30 miles is one could say, well, that's marathon. That's just slightly over marathon. But 50, the difference between 30 miles and 50 miles is pretty significant. But a 50K race.
Are you interested perhaps in trying to do a race of that length?
I am. I just don't know how I train for it. You do need a lot of time, and then the other thing is it's really hard on the body in two ways. One, there's a very high frequency of stress fractures in the feet and ankles and shins, and so there's that. And then there's an issue of actual organ failure. It's very hard on the kidneys and liver and lungs. And
did you happen to listen to that podcast that Joe Rogan did with David Goggins?
Yeah, I did. That guy's extreme. I don't know if his body was affected negatively, but I enjoy running.
Oh, it was. He broke all of these metatarsals in his feet halfway through the 100 miles that he was doing, and then he had kidney failure. He had to go to the hospital after it was over. And he was a power lifter at that time, so he weighed like 250 pounds, and he hadn't run more than 10 miles the entire year, and he went out and ran 100 miles in 24 hours.
Well, it raises a very interesting question: how much do you have to get out of your system? I've got a lot to get out of my system, but I really can get it out in a 6-mile run. My ideal race is a half marathon, and at that point, half marathon, I'm pretty mentally exhausted. I've done a couple of 20-mile runs, and I felt that to be a little bit extreme. if ultra begins at 50K, in other words, 30 miles, I just really can't see how I would enjoy myself. And the idea that the ultra would actually threaten something that for me is like a type of meditation or yoga, something I do daily. You take away running from me, I'd probably die spiritually.
Oh, the risk of being injured for a prolonged period would be too hard.
Well, not just injured.
I
knew a ultra runner in Colorado. This girl was very, very successful. She doesn't run anymore. She took up powerlifting. She had permanent organ damage. She can't run anymore. And
oh shit.
yeah, and it's absolutely devastating. So I think that I don't know if ultra runners started out as runners. Perhaps it was something of a crisis that drove them to ultra running. Because, I mean, I would think that if you really love running and you love competing, you first want to see how you can do at the shorter distances. That's where your youth is utilized the best. You want to run the 5,000 meters on the track. When you think you can't get any faster on the 5,000 meters, maybe a move up to like a half marathon. A lot of guys after college take up the marathon because it gives them a lot of space to no longer have to compare themselves to those really intense short distances where the amount of precision and the amount of effort is very, very
well.
That was
always the idea in running, which is that if you can't become the best at a shorter distance, you just continually move up the distance, and hopefully your speed and tenacity will then be an asset at a longer distance.
And that's what
I mean. I was a half miler, but I probably should have been a miler. Probably the mile was my race. I'm pretty sure that it was.
Yeah, I mean, Galen Rupp was a very talented 10,000 meter runner, and I think it wasn't clear that he could set a world record and continue to compete against some of the Northern Africans. And so he took his track talent to the marathon, and he was the first American to win the Chicago Marathon in about 20 years, I think. And he was able to use a kick, like about a 4:30 mile pace, to break the runners. Most marathoners don't have that technique. Now 4:30 relative to the pace they run a 5 or a 10,000 isn't that scintillating, but for a marathon it's unheard of to be able to shift gears like that. And so that's his technique. He isn't breaking the world record in the marathon, but he is able to break guys if he can lure them into like a 2:07, 2:08 pace, which is about 3 or 4 minutes off world record pace, but then accelerate a couple of 4:30 miles, maybe a couple of 4:25 miles in the last 5 or 6 miles of a race. He just absolutely breaks people. So if he can do a couple of 4:30s and then get back down to the regular pace, let's say 4:40, 4:45, he can break his opponents. But but there's something about the racing, about getting up in the morning and throwing yourself out to feel more. I know a lot of people do things. Peterson talks about people doing things to lose consciousness. Maybe they drink, maybe they do drugs, maybe it's addiction to sex or something like that. And but running, on the other hand, I think is a way of feeling more, and the after effect is a strengthening of the spirit and is a strengthening of the body. Now, ultra might be a form of some type of meditation. I imagine that the ultra guys get into something, especially the ones that can handle it, get into something of a hunter-gatherer mentality, or at least the mentality of the subsistence, the persistence hunters. And the persistence hunters are those who would run all day, eating some type of a gruel and drinking water, and chasing down animals that could not shed water. So I guess deer do not have sweat glands like humans, and when they're under chase, they don't take water and they don't sweat. So you eventually exhaust and dehydrate your animal. So rather than using technology such as a more advanced form of hunting, which I guess the Neanderthals were able to utilize, they were shorter, stockier, and stronger, and physically more powerful, and a little bit more clever than the Homo sapiens. And so they would use more sophisticated hunting tools to kill their prey. but they were more adept at killing the large mammoths, the large woolly mammoths. And so when the Earth's temperature increased, the large animals died off, and the small and faster animals remained. So the Neanderthals lost their ability to chase down smaller.
Well, that's the whole story.
That's one story. It might not be correct, but it's a nice myth. It's a nice myth. It's no different than any other myth.
Yeah, it's beautiful literature. I mean, it certainly makes sense. It's certainly very reasonable, and yeah, it's exciting to hear about stuff like that. What's even more interesting, though, is the idea that there were a number of different species of human beings that were around at the same time, and that today that we're just this single species of human that exists. It's pretty interesting to think about that.
Well,
that there was quite a bit more diversity.
You were talking about,
and I don't mean diversity and white privilege. I mean like real diversity, species diversity.
Right. I mean, but do you think that you were talking about globalism on an offline conversation, and the world wasn't as connected as it is now? I mean, do you think that the ability to see many different cultures by just going on to Google Flights and buying a ticket isn't the same type of exposure to something akin to different species?
Cultures and species. Yeah. I suppose it is. We're just simply talking about differences.
I mean, different parts of parts of Brooklyn. I mean, I'm talking about.
Yeah, the five boroughs used to be very different places.
I mean, the difference between the old Bushwick and Williamsburg. I mean, now there's probably no difference right now, but at least back in 1996.
Well, I mean, one thing is still true, is that if you live in one of the main four boroughs, you never go to the fifth, which is Staten Island. No one would ever want to go there if you're not living there. That was true many years ago, and it's still true today, I believe. Staten Island is garbage. You don't want to go there. But beyond that, the idea of the neighborhood and the small neighborhood, New York, that was one great thing about New York. I perhaps talked about it before, but there was definitely this sense of neighborhood. You know, the little bodega that the Korean lady had in the corner. If someone needed to work on my apartment, I would leave my key with her, and she would give it to the guy who would come over and go up to my apartment, do the work, and he'd give the key back to the Korean lady. People think, my God, in New York that can never happen. Those are people that don't live in New York. But New York is a very, very neighborhood kind of place. Your few blocks are where you live, and you begin to see and recognize everybody, and you really don't stray too far from that area. And so things like leaving your keys with someone that you don't really know very well, but you have daily communication in terms of seeing them, saying hi, and maybe buying something from them. That's a very serious bond.
Sort of vertical, the vertical concentration that creates a very intense village experiment in a very small high population area.
But it is interesting, though, that you have this. You're right. It's a very village idea, and it's almost created because of the masses, the total huge amount of people that are surrounding your few blocks that you walk around on. And it's a very interesting contrast. You wouldn't think something like that existed, but I think New York has always had that tradition of the neighborhood, and they have destroyed a lot of it with the urban planning. They had that terrible urban planner in the 60s and 70s. What was his name? Robert somebody or other. He wanted to build a superhighway right through the middle of Manhattan.
Right, and it would have torn up. What was it? Was it Lodo or Tribeca or something like that?
Yeah, it was going to go right through. I think right through the West Village, right through Tribeca. It would have just been this massive highway, and fortunately, it wasn't built. But he did a lot of other things which destroyed neighborhoods and destroyed a lot of the idea of that everyone lived in these few blocks and got along together and you got to know each other. That is, but that's not globalization, you know? I mean, people think that can be replicated on a world scale, but it can't. You know, that's the thing. You can't have a whole world that is connected like those 3 blocks. It's not scalable. That's the thing with human beings. We're just not scalable. We can remember 50 faces really, really well. We can have those relationships, but you cannot use technology to connect to 50 million or 50 billion faces
Right.
and have that same experience. We continue to think that we can be scalable, but we're not.
Right.
Even though our technology is scalable, all these things around us are scalable and are being scaled. We are, unfortunately, are not. Or maybe fortunately we are not.
Well, I would argue you can connect to 50 million people, but what counts as connecting the actual meaningful exchange of someone that you know, one of the 50 faces that you remember, something else is happening. There's a different force that is being applied to 50 million people. It's a very general force, and it's perhaps one of the forces that Scott would identify as coercive. A state trying to implement a structure or a narrative on a mass of people takes away the individualism of obviously the components of this mass of people. And so perhaps there's something akin to a message that's affecting 50 million people and a coercive scheme of a state. Perhaps the
well, I think you're onto something. I think it is coercive, but in the sense that the qualities of what it is to be a person, or what it is to communicate, have all been reduced. And it's in a process. It seems to be we're in a process of trying to get rid of the things that can't be quantified, the things that data can't pick up on, the things that really are beyond language. And if you can just reduce human being and individuality to a set of characteristics that you can put on a Facebook page, and you can reduce language to a bunch of emoticons or whatever, emojis, and just simple phrases. And if you can reduce communication to economic exchange, all of this can go into a computer and be followed by a government, and can be quantified and taken advantage of by corporate interests.
right.
But you have to get people to agree to this very reduced form of human life, and people are agreeing to it. They are absolutely agreeing to it and accepting it.
Right.
Unfortunately, they're also getting sick.
Right.
All these mental illnesses I attribute to this inability to express the very important parts of themselves.
I think that this is where the archetype of the Tower of Babel. This is what Peterson lectured on in I think one of the first 10 of his series of 16 lectures in the Bible. The Tower of Babel was a tower which was supposed to reach up to the heavens, and it was a structure. It was a great structure that was supposed to supersede God Himself. And the Tower of Babel, of course, was then followed by the Great Flood. And the Great Flood is we as a species came from water, and the flood wiped away civilization to almost reset the clock. So this massive information, this that is and economic forces.
Wasn't the Tower of Babel? Wasn't the story that God struck the tower down, and then the people were all lost? They all had different languages. That's where we get the word Babel from. When someone's babbling, it comes from the Tower of Babel.
Right.
That you can't understand. So there was suddenly now all these new languages. I guess we're trying to. I guess maybe I'm jumping ahead, but we seem to be trying to build another Tower of Babel to have a single language and a single way of doing things.
Right. I mean, well, it's interesting because I think that by having the singularity and by destroying the individual, you've created absolute chaos and nonsense. People no longer know what this message is that's affecting 50 million people. It's a force. It's a coercive force, but it lacks the meaning and communication of the individual and of the village. And this is going to insert chaos into humanity, such that we might be setting ourselves up for another flood.
Yes, Along similar lines, I was thinking about this idea of the individual. I've long been thinking about it, but I think we live in this age where everyone wants to talk about their own individuality and define themselves by a series of racial or sexual or gender characteristics, and the list goes on. But I look at things like people's Instagrams, and they often mention like elements of who they are, and a lot of times it involves products or sexual identity or any of these things. But they've come to identify themselves with these characteristics. It's like a personal resume, but I don't ever remember this as being something that existed before, where people were so open about trying to say what they were and trying to specify exactly what they were. Perhaps it's a way to make friends or to find like people, but I wonder how shallow it really is in the end. These things aren't really addressing what it is to be them. As I think what it is to be you as a person is more of a place and a time. And, it's a place in time. It's a physical space. It's a lineage space of history, and all of this you don't understand. This is all just wild. You're a place of wild and wilderness and all of these conflicting powers and gods and things. These things are all passing through you and about you, and in many ways, as a result, I don't think that anyone is really responsible for their own lives, and they're not even really capable of understanding what their lives are about. It's, life in some sense goes on even after you have your head shot off.
Right.
Your pieces go off, and they become something else.
So when you're talking about these new identifiers, or this method of identifying or trying to express oneself through these memes or these phrases, is it that the messages or the terms lack meaning because the audience is so general, or even if it's an audience significantly less than 50 million, let's say it's 200, you have 200 Facebook friends, or you have 5,000 Twitter followers, is it that you lack an individual response face to face with a person, with one of those 50 faces you remember and resonate with, and then furthermore, one of those 50 people that you can understand in the context of your village? And so
it's all very, I tend to look at it as you've heard of this, like it's a disorder. It's called disassociation or dissociative disorder, where you don't really think that you're the one acting. You feel this distance between your activities and it's some break. You don't really feel that it's you doing things.
Right.
And I think so many people live live with this kind of disorder. They say to the world in all of these spaces, technological spaces mostly, what they are, but they're not really these things. They don't really feel these things, but they have this virtual identity and this thing that they also are, and they act in a virtual world, and they also act in this physical world, this more wild world, and these things are two very different things. And I think it results in a sort of disorder, and it's disassociation.
Right.
And they don't really know where they're alive.
And the grounding, getting back to what I guess you could call more ordinary activity, this attitude is dangerous. Imagine if you're on a boat, and you know what you do on a boat. You bait, you set, you pull, and you work on machines that tend to break constantly, or you untangle knots. I mean, the idea that you would be disassociated from cutting squid and baiting ganyons, or setting a line, you wouldn't want to be setting, for example, with the old manual clip style.
Look,
any person suffering from dissociative disorder.
Any manual labor job that has the consequence of injury or death, you cannot have this dissociative disorder. You can't have it. You're going to get yourself killed or kill someone around
right.
you. And that's why when you meet, like, I'm around a lot of working class people. These people are very
grounded.
I guess you could say real people.
They're grounded.
They're very real people. They're not living in a virtual world. They're not confused. They know that they're doing a shitty job that they don't really like, or some of them do like it, but their problems are all very not virtual problems. These things they're dealing with are things that bleed and are dangerous and have consequences. And it's this influence of these technologies, and that people that are caught up in these virtual worlds, they need to do something. I mean, one of the things I think that is very helpful is great physical effort in life. Whether it's running or lifting weights or boxing or MMA. And I think this explains in part the great interest in the mixed martial arts now, is that this is really the opposite of the virtual stuff. If you can get good at jiu-jitsu, you now have this very, very, earthy skill. You take it's even metaphorical. I mean, you take people to the ground. I mean, you don't get much more earthy and dirty, and you mix your sweat with someone else's. This is a great antidote to this disassociation, this virtual stuff that I
right,
think
and it's constantly evolving
anxiety.
too. I mean, especially with guys like Sean O'Malley have taken. I actually don't even know. I don't even know what this guy's technique is. He has combinations of spinning roundhouse kicks followed by spinning back kicks, and when jiu-jitsu guys try to take him down, he doesn't have a traditional defense. They grab his leg, he'll hop around, and then he'll knock him out while the guy's grabbing his leg. I mean, I can't imagine how somebody like O'Malley has a problem with disassociation. Although he's a big pot smoker.
Look, I wish that I wish that I had devoted a lot of my life to martial arts so that I could really understand what's going on right now. But to me, in terms of intellectual stuff combined with physical activity, mixed martial arts is doing it. And it's a very exciting time because you're seeing the development. Even the last decade, it's just been incredible. Since I first started watching, probably about 10 years ago, it's been incredible. Even someone who doesn't know very much as I do, I can see this development. And there's no other sport that's going through such rapid development. But in many ways, I don't really consider it to be a sport. It's probably closer to like bullfighting. It's so aesthetic.
Yeah,
and the risks are so great.
Oh, the bullfighting is a perfect example of a direct connection to activity, composure, and thought. And the bullfighter has a much shorter time frame in which to define his entire reason for being. Think what is it, like 10 minutes in the ring? Seems like an eternity.
I think it's longer than that. I mean, it depends. There's no time limit really. But I would say bullfighting is still very intriguing to me. I mean, it's still one of the things I want to study more in depth. I want to just live in Spain for a season and follow a couple fighters around the country.
Right. Now, did you ever meet
Spain
anybody in Alaska who you might identify with dissociative disorder? I'm thinking a Mentor and Jason would be my prime candidates. Mentor would just bang. He would just bang totes for no good reason.
Wow.
And then Jason would just space out and do nothing at times, and then maybe break up the monotony by throwing an ice ball.
Yes. He was on drugs that cause dissociative disorder.
Ah, okay.
Those drugs. That's one of the primary causes of it. Is those I think antipsychotics. They cause these breaks in people.
Right. Well, Peterson makes a distinction between people that have a crappy situation, which I can identify with a chemical state in the brain. Andreas would I think find this conversation interesting, and then an actual organic brain disorder where you might need to use some chemical to knock somebody out of some terrible situation, but a lot of these antipsychotics obviously are being administered because people are just are stuck in just awful livelihoods or matrices. I mean, and it begins with their upbringing, the indoctrination system, which is otherwise known as a public education system, to the ethos that they now have to adopt, which is driven by media, government, and the after effects
I tend
of
to
bad
think
education.
I tend to think though that so much could be cured with movement and physical activity, strenuous physical activity. I think you and I have discussed it before. Is that that you and I both tend to have more faith and trust in people who have committed themselves to hard and dangerous work,
Right.
whether it was training or some sort of work that was dangerous and hard that tested you. And there's a lot to be said for people that have done that kind of hard physical work and then that bring that same discipline to intellectual work. The real failing is the people who have never physically been tested, who then think that they can become these intellectuals. They get way off course. They're not grounded in any way. They don't understand the idea of bleeding for something. Because you can, if you know how to train physically in the world, then you know how to train intellectually for something. You know you can envision and have consequences which are just as dangerous intellectually. But if you haven't trained hard and known what real training is about in the world, whether it's through running or through whatever kind of physical activity, you're going to be lacking a discipline, a very important discipline when it comes to intellectual work.
Right, but
it's just apparent with so many
there
people.
There is a paradox, though, with the physical labor and the exploration, and then the fact that if there's an intellectual project that involves writing, you do have to detach yourself from that physical labor and sit, and there's a balance.
Right.
For example, let's say you're fishing to make your livelihood. Well, on the one hand, there's a natural break in the year. The fishing season ends, and a lot of people need to recharge the battery, so they go home to their families and they do something normal, and it balances them, and then it rebuilds their courage, because you get tired and haggard, and you can either lose your courage or just become tired and make mistakes. And so there's that off season, but I guess if you're trying to think, or if you're trying to write, you'd be spending your time in that off season writing. Now you'd be very fresh right after the season ends, but there's a risk that as month 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 transpire, that you're further removed from the daily activity. Now, the great thing about fishing is that you only have that 6-month break. You get to go back to it and then get back into the actual world. But then there's the risk of the explorer. Let's say he does his mountain climbing, and he might have an unlimited break. It's up to the planning of his next adventure or his next trip. So there's always this mixture of being removed, becoming the sitter, to write something and have the space and solitude to develop and put out the ideas, and then return to the wilderness, or to some activity perhaps that's in the wilderness, to find some inspiration or some grounding again. Nietzsche perhaps was somebody who knew the value of being outdoors. It's all he wrote about in Zarathustra is the value of the mountains, and something very generative or something very inspirational about raw wilderness. But the question is, how much time did Nietzsche actually spend in the wilderness? Was he just contemplating the wilderness?
Well, we know we know that he was very sick most of the
Right.
time, with eye problems and digestive problems, and was not able to do a lot of the physical stuff that he wanted to do. So the Overman and Zarathustra are projections of the man he would like to be and wanted to be, but instead he was sentenced to a life in a hut, having to write and not being able to, just barely being able to write, so overcome with his afflictions, his physical ailments.
Now, you were writing in your tent. You were writing in your tent each night. Did this writing, was this something that followed you? Was this something that you needed? Did it get in the way of the journey, or was it the fact that you realized that, well, you're this Western man, you're this linguistic person, you're naturally a system builder in your head. You can't get away from language, so why not try to do the best that you can, realizing that you still have to exercise this demon from you in the way of thinking and writing, perhaps at the end of each day or every several days. I imagine there were times when you were so exhausted, or the days were so tough, that you weren't able to write at all, and you'd have to maybe write every 3 or 4 days and not every day. But was
no, I when I was cycling, even the hardest days, I would at least write down notes from the day, even fragments. There would always be something that I could pick up
Right.
on, because if you if you didn't write stuff down, you were going to lose it, because these sensations were also powerful, and there was one after the other, and you were not dwelling on them past the day that they happened in. That's the great wonder of a bicycle tour, or any sort of physical travel that takes a long time. It is also very repetitive, because the differences between the days were probably, to people who would read a blog, the blog of that, and look at the pictures, they would think that everything kind of looked the same, and it would probably be very boring. But in fact, there was all this nuance and subtlety, and if you don't write that nuance and subtlety down, or try and understand it, or try and turn it into language somehow, it'll be lost. So it was a challenge. It was a challenge physically to write like that when you're exhausted.
Right,
but it's also a challenge to express that subtlety, which would be hard even when you weren't tired to express.
I read certain people, and I get the feeling these are very good writers. They're easy to follow. They're very accessible. And then I read the stuff that I was writing either right after my journeys or during my journeys, and I realized, well, this is not carefully crafted like a writer. But I was just happy that I.
Yeah, but how could you do that? You know as well as I do. You were writing though when you were riding. You were writing every day.
In a fucking tent, sometimes at high altitude, where minutes earlier, if not an hour earlier, my issue was trying to secure my tent with large boulders because it was trying to blow into some lake at the top of a mountain, and I was fighting hypothermia, perhaps frostbite, and hunger.
So you can answer this question. I mean, you can answer this question. How hard was it to write at those moments? I mean, why did you write? Why not just stop? Why not write at all? Why write at all?
Well, I felt compelled, because I felt that what I was doing was so rare that I didn't want to forget, and I felt that I was experiencing something so important, and that something that very few people had done. Now, plenty of people, there are plenty of great bike explorers, but they just don't write. They didn't have a background in philosophy. Not that philosophy gives you the ability to write, but it was something that I guess it planted a seed in me, and I always felt like I needed to account for the meaning of what I was doing, and I was always looking for meaning. And I felt that I was having this revelatory bliss. Now, maybe I was just experiencing bliss itself, and I didn't, because I was in a good physical state and I was in nature. But I felt that my philosophical thinking was clearer and sharper than it was, in my entire life. So the irony is that while I thought that the goal was to get out of the West, to no longer have this specter, this albatross of language, of accounting for meaning, of writing, I would have thought that I would have just moved into a simple culture, really dropped money, moved into a village, and replaced my language with the language of the local village, and I would have become basically a pre-literate person, very happy, and with no inclination to write or to read whatsoever. My life would be that of the village, right? I don't think that's not. I still think that that's possible. I still think that's maybe one of the goals. It's a very risky goal for a Western person, because for a Western person to do that, they're taking all of their system building and their codification and all of the strength they have from math and language, and throwing it all away, and really taking a gamble at succumbing to the vulnerability of a pre-literate attitude. And you see what happens to pre-literate people. They get their lunches eaten when the literate societies move in. And so for a highly literate person to take their very strength and to try to allow for it to disintegrate is a risky task. But the irony was that my literacy, or at least my analytic inclinations, strengthened the more I was out into the wilderness, and the more I was actually in the midst of what I would call nearly pre-literate people. So I don't know if this was just the last forceful effort of my Western self to defend itself before it perhaps went away. That could have been that could be the cycle. Is that the Western brain gives its strongest defense right before it begins to disintegrate. And I never pushed myself hard enough and long enough and really moved into that pre-literate village to see if that would exactly happen, to see if the village's goodness appealed to my conscience, and my conscience moved away from this desire to document, to reflect, and to codify. I mean, that is exactly what writing is doing.
But what we're talking about, though, is something that it seems to be an experiment that was conducted by that guy in Krakauer's book, Gene Rossellini, who tried to live like in these different periods of human history. And I just don't think when the technologies become available to people, you can go back before these technologies. These are such world-changing and revolutionary events. You cannot return to some ignorant place that existed before them. And I don't mean ignorant in a negative way. I just mean ignorant of these things. You can't make yourself ignorant anymore. You've been physically transformed. It's a part of you physically.
Is it possible, though, to break the Western spirit? And I don't mean to say that the Western spirit is a positive thing or a negative thing. I'm still trying to figure out what it is to begin with. But, I mean, is it possible to have a transformation even after having been educated in the West? I mean, I don't see any reason why not.
I don't know. I think though that we're more a product of these environments than we are capable of moving into other environments and being another person. We're a kind of plant or a kind of being or a kind of animal that can only live in certain environments, and I mean technological environments. We've become accustomed to that, and we need these places in many ways. And we'd be adrift without them.
Think
so. In a pre-literate world, I'm not sure even I could survive in a pre-literate world. I think I would bring literacy with me. I just don't know how to get around it.
Now you do.
It's such a powerful technology.
You do know the experience of living in a culture with a different language. Now French, definitely a highly intellectual language. You're really not going to get very far outside of a philosophical mindset by thinking in French. Portuguese, I felt frustrated thinking in Portuguese at times. It certainly didn't strike me as a philosophical language, nor does Spanish. But let's talk about well,
Spanish has one thing which strikes me as very philosophical, and it changes the way you think about things, which is the verb to be. In English, we just have a single verb to be, but in Spanish, you have two forms of it. And one is a permanent form of to be and being, and the other is an impermanent form of being. And I guess this comes from Arabic, from which Spanish has a relationship and roots through Spain and the Moors, because Arabic apparently has these two senses of to be. So there are some interesting things in language-wise that change the way you look at the world. Now this is always the interesting thing about learning language, is that when you have these different structures,
great. That's really going to help you get to the village experience. You've got two ways of thinking about ontology. Yeah, that's.
It is, though. I mean, how do you translate like Heidegger and these existential guys into Spanish? I mean, isn't it throwing like a wrench into their whole philosophy? Because there's more than one way to say being. Do the French have the equivalent of ser and a star? I mean, no, they have a single être is the verb for to be. It's just a single verb, just like English. They don't have two verbs for to be. But the great thing about living as you have done and I have done, and living in another language, is you do see that unlike this Noam Chomsky guy who thinks that all languages are reducible to the same thing.
What does he think they're reducible to?
In fact, a whole other world.
What does he say they're reducible to? I forgot.
He thinks. I think he believes that there's some sort of innate physical basis, not discovered yet, but all language emerges from the same thing. And the idea is that we could have these variations in language, but in fact, we all see the world the same. And a guy like Ted Carpenter hated this idea and said, this is just not true. From all of my work, this is not true. I mean, but Chomsky's an academic who's never lived in another language and thought and spoken and had to do things in another language. When you've had those experiences in very different languages and places, you realize that the world is totally different when you're using this language and you're a part of it, a part of this culture. And there's no similarity to, you can't even use your words. Your words don't work. There's no translation. So, I mean, Chomsky, he's another one of these academics that's never had a manual labor job or never ran until he threw up. You know, things would be different. You'd write different books if you'd had those experiences. You'd actually been hurt.
Right.
You actually had a few scars.
Right. So, I mean, Chomsky's on the other end of the spectrum of that thought experiment that I proposed a couple years ago, where the anthropologist gets to be an expert, and he realizes that to the degree he gets closer to the culture, he gets closer to abandoning the project of anthropology, because the very system of documentation, even though he is getting closer and closer to being the perfect anthropologist, he's getting closer and closer to realizing that the more he becomes part of that culture, that is to say, to become the perfect anthropologist, to really get that perspective that you can't get from just observing, but by becoming a part of the culture, the more you adopt, the more the very project of documenting becomes meaningless. And so the perfect anthropologist, or the etiology of anthropology, is actually the disintegration of anthropology, which is tying back to what I'm talking about with the destiny of true exploration, and the concept of the no return ticket is the disintegration of the codifying not linguistic, but literate mind. And it would be akin to.
Let me ask you this though. What could you imagine you would, let's say you had become an accountant and you'd never traveled and you'd never done anything, and you'd been an accountant.
Well, you know, I actually have been an accountant, and I've never traveled. I've been lying about all my trips. I've actually never left. I just went. I lived in someone's basement, and I made all this shit up.
I know, but listen. Imagine you had been an accountant and you'd never had these experiences. We speak a lot about things that make you happy, things that make you unhappy. This is a real preoccupation with Westerners. Do you think you would have been happier to have not had any of this knowledge that you have now? These to have known these places and experiences, to have seen another way to live. Do you think you would have been happier to be ignorant of all of that, or do you think that you're happier again living as this accountant, but having had all of these experiences and knowing about these places and people?
So
you speak other languages.
I did my explorations and my journeys were out of necessity. I felt like I was going to die spiritually if I didn't to get out, and I think I had the gift of having a good upbringing and doing in positive, constructive things, and having an athletic background. So an athletic background is by nature a very positive thing. You take kind of an unshaped feeling of rage and physicality, and you hone it into a set of rules. Running around a track, 800 meters versus, you just talked about a very minor distinction, 800 meters versus 1,600 meters. Jesus, we were just talking about 50 miles. You were making a big deal about the difference. You said, I should have been a miler. Okay, so you're looking at meters, and you're looking at rules, and you're forcing your body into these definitions, and it's very productive.
But it was achieved. It was achieved through blood and sweat and great pain. Those discoveries. It wasn't just I thought, I should be a miler, without any reason. Right. I wasn't going to win a 100-meter race. I wasn't going to win a 200-meter race. I was a decent 400. I was going to be a decent 400-meter guy. I could have been a pretty good 800-meter guy, but I would have been a fast miler. But I didn't. The reason I didn't like the mile was it really, really fucking hurt to run that hard and run that fast. And the pain, I'll be honest, the pain scared me. I had enough pain in the 800 meters, and now I was looking at doubling the pain. And because I originally wanted to run in college, and I knew in college, and my father even told me, he said, they're going to make you a miler. Your mile is really your race. And I realized he was correct. And I thought about the intense pain that race was going to cause me. And I realized that I didn't know if I wanted that pain in my life. I'd just come off a lot of painful racing. And the whole question is, could you be champion? I mean, the idea is to be champion. The idea is to be the best. The idea is to go to the Olympics and to be the best. And my father had that idea. He wanted to go to the Olympics in the 400 meters. He wasn't good enough.
Now, let me ask you the same question you just asked me. And I haven't answered it yet, but I want to. Maybe we could try to answer the same question with just two different metaphors. Do you regret that you were an athlete and that you took that risk? And you?
No, not at all. I was a very good basketball player. I had to catch up to a lot of those guys because I'd never played basketball in my life.
You didn't make the NBA, and you could have you could have been studying.
I was a good baseball player.
You could have been studying during those basketball games. You could have been reading and writing. You could have been. You could have been maybe applying yourself more to business or philosophy. So you think you got something out of the athletics?
Oh, absolutely. I think that I was when I did. I was studying at the age of 13. I started to read, and I think you also began to read around that time too. And I mean reading outside of the classroom. And we were both doing our own reading and exchanging stuff, and the local library became a really cool place. I never imagined that I would be into something like that, because when I was young, I was never a good reader. My mother didn't like that. I was the lowest in my class. I had problems reading and paying attention. I was not a good student, really. And this reading thing really came later to me, and I remember discovering Marcus Garvey, who said, the great black nationalist, early black nationalist, who said that you should. He was basically.
I remember your black nationalist stage. I think it lasted for at least 2 or 3 years.
It was an intense period. The rap music and black nationalism.
It was Marcus Garvey, Frederick Douglass, and Malcolm X, I think.
No, not Frederick Douglass. Marcus Garvey, I really liked. Malcolm X, I really liked. Fred Hampton, who was killed in Chicago. Black Panthers,
yeah.
Huey Newton. Huey Newton's got a
Black
great...
Panthers, right.
But Huey Newton's book, Revolutionary Suicide, is a great book. But anyway, the thing about all these guys was they were intellectuals, but they were physical intellectuals. These guys were badasses. They would kick your ass. You know, they'd been in fights. They'd bled and they'd sweat. And that appealed to me. It showed me that intellectuals didn't have to be pussies, which is what I thought they were. And that changed the way I looked at books. And so my mindset began to change, and I began to approach literature and books and philosophy and poetry or whatever it was. I was approaching it with the discipline that I'd learned on the basketball court, on the athletic track, and the rigor, because physical activity makes you rigorous. You know, it's very simple.
You have to fight your way through a lot of thinkers. There's a lot of shit. There's a lot of trash. So there's a lot of trash talking in the basketball court, and I think that's akin to a lot of the shit that you run into in literature. There's a lot of bad ideas. There's a lot of people that mislead you. There's a lot of people that don't want you to do well.
Think about all the workouts. Think about all those workouts that you pushed yourself through that were shitty workouts that you were it was terrible, and it was hot. There was whatever, and you did the workout, right? The same thing you have to go through in philosophy. If you want to get good, you got to get some background. You got to understand the terminology. You got to do a lot of work and a lot of workouts, a lot of strenuous stuff that is not really going anywhere in itself, but is going to be a building block for your next effort. This stuff is very hard, and I don't know. I don't trust anyone in philosophy who hasn't done something impressive. And by the same token, I believe that a lot of people who have excelled physically in things, I don't encourage them to write or to want to write, but when they do have something to say, I will definitely listen. And many of them are not articulate enough to be able to talk about what they've done or what they've felt, but the ones that are, they have brilliant, brilliant things to say, and they're always worth listening to. These are truthful things that have been tested in the world. And so I think... So you're getting back to this question of should this physical activity ever been done, or should I have just spent my time in the library? It had to have been done. It was the best preparation for intellectual work was manual labor jobs and sweating and beating the shit out of yourself in a workout. and just challenging yourself physically all the time, and wearing yourself out, just beating yourself down. That is great, because when you learn the extremes to which you could go physically, and you bring that same mentality to the world of books and literature and libraries, you're dominant, because there should be competition in that world. There should be like a physical competition with consequences in that
Right.
world. And if you're fucking wrong about the world and you're a philosopher, that's dangerous shit.
Yeah.
That ends up with totalitarianism and all kinds of stuff that was never tried out in people's lives. These are great mistakes that could kill millions, that could ruin your life and other
Right.
people's
Yeah.
lives.
A guy like
And
Gil
so-
at the front dock can teach you more about the way things really should be than 50 philosophers at Yale, Pittsburgh, and NYU combined. I mean, a guy like Gil. I mean, his office and his sphere of activity, and the people that he is responsible for protecting. I mean, I think that environment taught me more about the balls and strikes, of course, of schema than any type of reading.
But all of these, the knowledge that exists in those people in those places that's passed along, you can't say it came from this guy or that guy. It's all this. It's the wonderful thing about it. It's this shared knowledge about how to move a tote, how to do this properly, and it comes from men presented with the problem of doing something and having these instruments with which to try and accomplish a task. And yes, in the beginning, some people fail, some people get hurt. And then people learn from that and they don't do that again. And that knowledge is passed on and passed on. And no one knows where it comes from. But it's been tested in the world. And now we know that it's true. And that is the mistake that philosophers make, is that none of the shit they're doing has been tested in the world in some way. And how do you test in the world philosophical ideas? There's only one way to do it. That is for the philosopher himself to go into the world and to test those ideas. That is the only man who should be testing those ideas. And he needs to return from the world, if he can survive. If he takes those ideas seriously enough into their extremes, he can return and he can say, this is what happened. And so, yes, it was important to write as I was on
Right.
a bike trip. And you feel the same way. You were exercising demons, but you were also testing the philosophical ideas that put you in that original position. You were sent out there with a certain philosophical apparatus,
but
that you were now
Right.
exposing.
I didn't
to a
want to
new
come.
world
I didn't want
and
to
finding out what it was about.
Back, though. I think the journey was necessary, and I had no choice. I had to, just like I had to compete in some type of sport in order to positively channel energy. I never wanted the journey to end, but it did end in many ways for many different reasons. For you and I, it ended because you literally reached the end of the world, or Tierra del Fuego in Ushuaia, and the road ran out. And so I'm
Yeah, but didn't you want to stop eventually? I mean, I know those guys go on like 4-year cycling trips. I can't do that shit. I want to go for like 6 months maximum, and then I'm tired and I want to sit down and I want to start writing again. And I don't want to write for the rest of my life either. I'll probably go on some other trip, some other new adventure will present itself, and I'll go do that. But I'm unable to go for more than 6 months. That's what I realized. After 6 months, just like,
it was
man, it becomes
it was harder and harder to leave people behind every day, or you'd make friends
That's
for
right.
a couple of days or a week. And I wanted to actually live in a village, and I thought I was going to be in the middle of Brazil, but the girl I ended up meeting was a city girl, and so the place I lived was a big city. Now, having said that, Sao Paulo did have communities like Manhattan, and it's very clan-like. People are very close to their original families and friends, and so that was my village, and that was a positive thing. But I feel like I failed, and I shouldn't have left Brazil, just like I feel like I failed and I shouldn't have left Alaska. So my returning to recapitalize, or whatever you call it, it wasn't that I went out on a trip so that I could then have better insight into becoming a corporate guy again. No, I never wanted my journeys to end. I did them out of necessity, and I wish there was a narrative or a journey that was still continuing. There's still a lot of the world I want to see, and that was one of the main motivations of getting out in leaving the West in the first place is it was the feeling I was missing out on the way the world was, all of the wonder. I think you would agree that was majority of the exploration is the absolute wonder, seeing the stars in the top of the Andes when you're going over the mountain pass. You went in one direction, I went in the other direction. I went from Mendoza to Chile. You went from Chile to Mendoza. But I mean, can you imagine going through
the constellations? We saw the same constellations, and the incredible thing is that we grew up in the northern hemisphere, and we have the names for a variety of different constellations. I remember studying some astronomy, and I was very interested in a lot of that. But you go to the southern hemisphere, and you look up at the night sky, and it's a totally different night sky. There's nothing that's similar to anything that you've known, and that is an extraordinary thing, right? To look up at the sky and to find something that's unfamiliar. Like, you don't think that that's a big deal, but it's a huge deal.
Well,
one of the things that I've learned, one of the things that I learned in life is that one of the ways to calm yourself. I found that this is it's a better technique than meditation. If you're feeling anxiety or you're feeling unhinged, or there's something wrong with the way you're connecting with the world and other people, go out at night and look at the moon. It has this incredible effect upon you just to look up at the moon. Because think about it, you're looking up at something that everyone that has ever been your relative has looked up at. It has this calming, timeless quality that connects you to all of the generations and all of the earth itself and to the universe and to all these things. This is what men have looked at and speculated about and made myth about. And they look up at this bright object in the sky. And for you to do it, it brings you back into the world. It destroys all of these negative influences and stuff
there's
like that.
And there's no better way to jumpstart a corporate meeting at first thing in the morning on a Monday than by sharing a story of gazing into the moon and the universe.
Yeah. People should do it. People should do it. Just go look at the fucking moon, man. Just look at the moon for 5 minutes. I'm telling you.
The thing is, you'll probably agree that the wonder was that you didn't know what you would encounter. I remember getting up this minor mountain from Chile into Argentina, and this was in Patagonia. So when you're going over the Andes there, I mean, you're only talking about like a 5,000 or 6,000 foot summit, nothing major. And I was camping along.
Not the Aconcagua.
No, nothing like that. Yeah, that's all the way up in the north, man. But that's a different beast. But I remember camping, bathing in a river, cooking my meal. The sun went down, and I said to myself, "Jesus fucking Christ, that's a big volcano with a crater in the middle." There was the stars. There were these primeval trees, all these leaves that I'd never seen. It looked like it was out of some period where the dinosaurs were walking around. But I look up, and I'm right next to a fucking volcano, and I'd never in my life had seen a volcano just right next to me, and I never had as a goal to see a volcano. That's the thing. I see these people with the bucket lists, and while the bucket lists seem very exciting, I want to scuba dive in ice cold waters at a continental divide in Iceland. Okay, great, but that's not exciting because you have to run into something like that. You have to run into a continental divide in ice cold waters in Iceland. That's 90% of the excitement, is that you didn't even know that fucking thing was there. I didn't know a volcano was there. I hadn't done any research. The planning and the bucket list. I mean, you've seen all the photos on the internet. You've read all about it. You've paid the money to get there, and then it happens. I mean, how fucking anticlimactic is that? The wonder is that I mean, and that's the thing. I could go on another 4 years of cycling, and I could go to the Silk Road, or I could go to Australia, or I could go to stretch across Africa, and it might be extremely disappointing.
I think there's
but
nothing
it could also
wrong.
be incredible.
Right. I agree with you. I think that there's nothing wrong with choosing a destination. Like we both chose the end of the world as a destination, but it's a real anticlimactic letdown when you get to the end of the road, because all this fucking excitement happened. I don't really remember anything you wrote about Ushuaia, but I do remember these incredible stories of you and I think it was Gustavo. Was that him?
Yeah.
You were riding with? Yeah, you and Gustavo working on this house
Well, that
for
was
a while.
Carlos. That was Carlos. Gustavo was up in the north. Yeah.
Oh, Carlos. Yeah. Right. Carlos. Yes. Working on this house in Tierra del Fuego, and then getting boat passage and having to portage your bikes through marshland and forest. There were all these extraordinary
it was still Patagonia,
events
but it wasn't
that were
Tierra
all
del Fuego
about.
yet. But it was Lago del Desierto. You went across that one on a boat, I think.
I don't know. I don't think so.
Oh no, you didn't do
never took
Carretera Austral. No, you wouldn't have.
No.
Yeah, no, yeah, okay.
No. I was never over there. So, but my point though is that there's nothing really wrong with having this this destination, but the idea though that it would be hard to get there to these destinations, and these journeys would be the unknown. The destination would be the known kind of place, but the journey itself and how you get there and how long it takes, that would be unknown. That is adventure. That is where you learn things. The arrival, yes, we've all seen the pictures. These are probably famous places. Look, all of the people that go to Ushuaia, most of them are tourists who fly in on a jet airplane, and they land there. They get there on a cruise, and then
Like
they
Seward. It's very similar to Seward in that respect.
Exactly. They don't have the trip down the Alaska Highway. They don't get to know any of these things. And this is what's missing. But guess what? You need to be able to do all that. You need time. You need discipline. You need physical strength, because these journeys are not easy journeys. Even I mean, you don't want to take a bus ride across Patagonia, but the alternative is you got to go by bike or by motorcycle or by motor car, and it's just hard one way or the other. Things are going to happen, but as you and I have both realized, is that more things happen when you're on a bicycle. You're approachable, and you stand out, and depending upon where you go, you may be very, very interesting to good people, but also to bad.
Yeah, you had asked me if it was a good idea or a bad idea. You can still hear me, is that right? Yeah,
I hear you.
I think Wittgenstein talked about the one of the greatest places of hell that you can be in is a situation where your story or whatever you're experiencing is incommunicable. And the ability to share or confess is a very, very important thing. And the more extreme and the greater the degree of ecstasy and the greater the degree of risk and adventure you experience, the more impossible it is to share, because you've got a story that everybody thinks that they've heard before. Yeah, you rode your bike across Patagonia, but they're mistaking that with flying to Patagonia, taking a photo of Torres del Paine, or to your point, the cruise ship visit to Ushuaia. Because that's all they can garnish in their head is just the photos on the internet or the description in the guidebook, or that's all they can imagine. They can't physically recreate anything that we've done. And so the intense isolation, I think, that I experience on a daily basis by never being able to share the most important experiences of my life put me in a very, very special place in hell on a daily basis. So it's certainly not something I regret, but it certainly limits my peer group. I don't.
Yeah, that's the thing though, is that by your experiences, it's possible to feel alienated with the world, and I am certainly happy about all the things that I've done and read, but these have all been things that have gone against the narrative of the time and the trajectory of the time, and it's been by choice that I've gone against all of this. and it's led to discomfort, but also this great confidence, great power. But it certainly has not made my life easier. But then again, at the same time, the people that have easy lives, I think, are the most unhappy people. So I prefer struggle, and I prefer revolutionary activity. I prefer the threat of death. I prefer all these things. This is much more interesting, and I'm not scared of anything. So I'm not scared of dying either. So it doesn't matter to me. It just doesn't matter. I'm just going to continue with what I'm doing. I think it's working.
Right, and it's I can't say it would be nice to not have the desire to want to explore, to just be satisfied with maybe competing in, let's say if you're a lawyer, or you're a doctor, or you're a corporate person, to just have that be the thrill. Wouldn't that be nice? I could say to myself, to just be motivated for ascending the hierarchy in one of those professions and being rewarded monetarily for it. There is no correlate of being rewarded monetarily for great exploration. It would be nice, I guess, to be able to return to the West and survive, where there was a system where you somehow gained $1 million for going on a 1-year bicycle trip, so you didn't have to fight your way back for your daily survival. That is to say, your rent, your utilities, your registering at the DMV, or buying insurance and paying taxes and having to fit in. It's not easier when you do a journey like that. There's a certain amount of reverse culture shock to get back into the West and compete again. So, but then if it's necessary to do that in the first place, then you really had no option of going in the first place, because if you would have died as a person, if you would have just perhaps ground yourself into some type of nihilism or depression, if you never went out and did what you knew you could, then there's no alternative. And so there's no so the question of whether or not it was a good or a bad idea is perhaps not applicable, because it was necessary.
No. Yeah, in all these things, it was necessary. That's the whole thing, though, is that people. I think the people that are most troubled need to listen to themselves somehow in some deep way, and I don't know how that happens. I think for me and for you, it's been very clear what had to happen in our own lives. And I know, like, Socrates talks about the daimon, this thing that he listened to that told him what to do. And I feel that I've always had that. There's been something.
I think he was actually listening to Charles
told me
Mingus.
what to do. Yeah. He had a bass player. He had a bass player deep inside him who directed him. But I feel this. There's been no question about what I've had to do. I've had to do it. And to resist. I mean, it wasn't even like there was resistance. I just didn't even have resistance. There was no choice.
Is it possible?
You couldn't stop me.
These guys, these anthropologists, these neuropsychologists, I don't quite have the vocabulary to describe it. I'm sure Peterson does. But is it possible that there's an actual good evolutionary tendency at work for guys to get restless and want to explore? In other words, it's an antidote to congestion. With congestion, the state builds, and the state can constrain and tax and imprison or murder those who resist the power structure. I mean, if you're not in charge, if you're not king, you're going up against the king if you want to act outside of whatever his system of rules are. So isn't it possible that? And then there's the idea of the progenitor. If you're not the firstborn, you have to go out and make your way anyway. Is it possible that there's something in the very biology of certain people that their place of comfort is in exploration, and then that would have helped them.
Yeah.
That would have helped them.
I think that probably that was helpful, but one of the biggest threats to the state is the idea that people would leave the state. You know that the Carpenter talks about this, especially Scott talks about this. It's also in 14. No, I don't know where else it is. But they were talking about the building of walls in the Roman Empire and the Chinese Empire. it was initially interpreted by anthropologists as trying to keep barbarians out, the warriors who would come to rape and pillage. But in fact, they've now changed their tune about this whole thing. It was about keeping people who paid taxes in. They didn't want people
Really?
to leave. So the walls and the borders are all about enclosing people and stopping them from being restless and leaving. You want the taxpayers
What about
never
this
to
current?
leave.
What about this
It's
current
to stay
wall to
and to
Mexico?
work and to
What
pay
about
their
this current wall
taxes.
to Mexico then? Is that nobody wants to escape up north, but the south where it's warmer?
Well, but think about it. The wall has the effect of telling everyone who lives in America that you don't want to go to Mexico, that it's better where you are. We have to keep the barbarians out. The wall doesn't necessarily have to be manned by snipers who are facing into the country to shoot the people who are trying to escape the country. The snipers can be facing out at barbarians who are supposedly out there. But the idea is you want to give the populace the sense that where they live is the best place, and that people are all trying to sneak in to steal from them, and that you should never leave here. I mean, the walls serve such different purposes, but the walls serve the singular purpose of keeping a tax-paying population stagnant.
It
and
makes
not
me
restless.
think some of the most special places where I always had the sense that there was something hidden about some part of world history that hadn't yet evaporated. I was looking before all these wars happened in the Middle East. I was looking at Yemen and the various Stan countries, including Dagestan, and it just so happened that right as I was looking at these places, which were totally peaceful and untouched, these horrific wars occurred between the West and these ancient cultures with Afghanistan, Yemen, Dagestan had some conflict with Russia, just absolutely destroyed them to the point where they're too unsafe to visit, or maybe they aren't unsafe to visit, and that's just what they're telling us. But in any case, I find it strangely coincidental that these rare and special places have the most horrific conflicts with the West, as if the West is just trying to kind of erase the last evidence of another way of living.
That's exactly it, though. You have to be suspicious of any place that a Western power says is backward or
Evil.
terrible, of human rights violation. They go after these places, and basically they're saying these places are resistant to us opening markets up inside them and getting our corporate interests to not allowing our corporate interests to go in there and take advantage of their populations and sell them products. That's really the sin that these countries have committed.
Right. And, I even heard that Portugal, my last time in Portugal was 2001, and it felt like old world Europe. And a lot of people who had been there at the time, or in fact had grown up there in the 70s and 80s, and even the 90s, said that, yeah, Portugal was one of the last places where you felt like you were outside of Lisbon, you felt like you were in the old world, the old painted homes, the donkey-drawn carriages hauling large amounts of cork to be made into wine stoppers, and but now I'm told that Portugal's created these 10-year tax breaks for Westerners to move in there, and the real estate market has taken off, and the traditional structures have been demolished in favor of the high rises, and so you have a modern Western influence basically transforming what was the last bastion of old world European culture. And
Look, but getting back to something you said earlier about the Tower of Babel, they're trying to turn everything into this globalized one-way system. It'll eventually fall apart. I mean, this is just how things work. They've always worked this way. They get big enough, and when they fall apart, the chaos will be so beautiful. There'll be a dark age to last 1,000 years, and in that darkness will proliferate the most wonderful art, the most beautiful communities, the most wonderful human understanding of one another. I mean, people demonize the dark ages that fell after that came out after the Roman Empire. But this is one of the great times in human history. And people demonize the Dark Ages that happened in Greece. But the Dark Age in Greece was where Homer emerged and the great poets and tragedians. Great art, great art emerges out of these periods of darkness and illiteracy and madness and no statehood. But the state never, even the historians who basically are propaedeutics for the state, these fuckers, they never address the beauty of these periods. They demonize these periods because it fits the narrative of the state as being necessary. And this is a sort of intellectual wall people have. They don't want to go and look at the other side. These walls are all there to keep people in.
I mean, Hesiod came out as a very simple moralist, and his moralism was very pragmatic. It was half how to farm and then half how to manage your affairs. And the two were intricately tied together because he said that if you didn't have your affairs in order and you didn't have your grain stored, you then would rely on the state. That would create complexity and chaos, and the state would be managing the affairs of other people. But if you managed your relationship with your neighbors and your family members correctly, but most importantly, if you did all of the hard work necessary during the growing season to become self-sufficient, then you wouldn't have problems. And it was a very basic morality. And he said that he learned how to write from the gods. The gods came to him, and he learned the lost story of the gods. And there was wisdom in what the gods had gone through themselves. And his message was a very, very simple message of tending to your own affairs, not using the state, or not trying to create a Tower of Babel anew, which perhaps had destroyed the previous Greek culture. But by managing your own affairs, you tend not to create a state. And by not creating a state, you're not creating a Tower of Babel, which leads to a flood. And the flood is a metaphor for our returning to our very elemental nature, that is to say the ocean, the water. And that is to say a wiping out of humanity so that something can arise that doesn't have the seeds of the corruption that lead to the Tower of Babel. Now, the question is, do we welcome a new flood? That seems rather apocalyptic and nihilistic. I can't imagine wanting to look forward to a destruction of everything. It would be absolute hell in my lifetime.
What if the apocalypse isn't so bad? I mean, no. What if it isn't so bad? You know, I just these people are all these fear mongers, and they're scaring you. They're scaring people into a corner. They're scaring you into not wanting to look outside the wall, to go over the wall. They're saying, stay. This is the best place.
It's good not to be afraid of transformation, just as it is good not to be afraid of the journey and the adventure and the potential disaster. You could have died in many of the things that you've done, whether it's driving a truck, whether it's working on a fishing boat, whether working on a dock, or nearly dying of dehydration in the middle of a desert. But that's the positive channeling, the adventure, the journey, the sport. I don't believe that's apocalyptic. And I think the apocalypse, by its very definition, is something terrible. It's when we've completely lost control, that we're no longer able to channel our efforts into anything positive. We're no longer able to manage our affairs in any way, shape, or form. We can't hop on a plane, and we can't get on a bicycle and do something constructive. It's terrible.
I just don't see anything like that ever happening. I mean, there's always some way to be constructive and to do something.
Yes, yeah, I completely agree. So therefore, this
dignity.
Apocalypse you're talking about certainly couldn't be what I'm talking about. You're saying that it's.
I think it's fear mongering. I think it's political fear mongering.
Well, then it's a question of terminology. Control. I mean, the idea of apocalypse I have is a chaos that's destructive. It isn't adventure and the unknown and ecstasy and wonder. It's the opposite of that. It would be, for example,
it sounds like what's happening right now. We live in a very tame, bland time, a very domesticated time. Isn't that the apocalypse?
Well, then that's a brilliant idea. I think that's that's the way I would want to define an apocalypse, a death of the spirit. Then, and
General, let's shut this down.
This is a
It's a good way to end.
It's a great way to end with the question: what if the apocalypse isn't so bad? Yeah.